So I will now introduce Dr. Ron Paul. He is the champion of the Constitution. He is America's preeminent defender of liberty. He did his residency and his medical career here in Detroit at Henry Ford Hospital. He's an outstanding medical doctor. He not only provided great care, but he demonstrated the importance of peaceful, voluntary cooperation and helping people out in his practice in Texas. And so he just said, you know, he would do something, if they couldn't afford to pay, he would say, don't worry about that, we'll take care of your medical needs, but you do something nice for somebody also, you see? And so that's the way the doctors operate, like my grandfather did way back in the day. Dr. Paul also was in the Air Force as a medical flight surgeon during the Vietnam era. And of course, he served in Congress for quite a few years. We have talked many times here about the Federal Reserve, the need to audit the Fed and to end the Fed. And as you know, Dr. Ron Paul has been the leader in that fight. He's been the leader in the fight against the welfare warfare state. He's been the leader in the fight against the unconstitutional and counterproductive never-ending wars going all over this world that make us less safe, less free, and less prosperous at great cost to life and limb and treasure. And he has also fought hard for all of our civil liberties, our economic liberties, and all of those different things. So I could go on for a long time, but we'd run out of time if I gave him the proper introduction. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me as we welcome Dr. Paul with that famous chant that we did during the campaigns, Ron Paul, Ron Paul, Ron Paul, Ron Paul, Ron Paul.
Ron Paul.
Very good. An outstanding job. A big round of applause. Dr. Paul, take it away.
Thank you. That was very nice. You know, there's been writings up in some of the libertarian articles and the non-libertarian articles that say, where did the revolution go? It's dead and gone. There is no libertarian revolution that started in the 08 and 12 campaign. But I'll tell you what, just listening to your group and Dennis, your excitement, the revolution is alive and well, and that's what the theme of my new book is, the revolution after 10 years. Because my argument is that there are groups like yours that are still there, and you're most important. All that noise we get from the media and what's going on politically and all that arguing what's going on in Washington and elsewhere, that is superficial, and the only thing that really counts is people who are thinking about things seriously. And that's why I'm delighted to meet with some people like you. This group sounds very, very energetic. And the thing is, coming from Detroit should give us all encouragement, because it is alive and well. And the effort that so many of you have been involved in, not only in the political campaign, but in campaign for liberty, really, this is, to me, the most important thing. People say, you know, I talk a lot about education and understanding the issues, then why did you spend so much time in politics? Well, I thought it was important, and that was my thing to do, to get the attention and try to change things. And others have other ways to do it, you know, and so many of you have done so many other things, and just the working campaign for liberty has kept the momentum going. And Dennis mentioned, you know, about the Fed. I give the Campaign for Liberty the credit for mobilizing the people to put the pressure on those individuals in Washington, because when we have votes, and even since I left Congress, the votes, the people in Congress feel obliged to vote for auditing the Fed. It's not that they know much about it or care that much about it, but the political pressure is put there. And that's why I think it's so important for everybody to understand the message of liberty, because the Congress and government is a reflection of the people's attitude. And it's not the reflection of 51%. The 51%, the majority, is a reflection of the people who are leading the philosophic revolution. And the thing that's going on right now is the obvious failure of a system that we've been living with, that we inherited, that we were born into, and that was the progressive revolution of the early part of the last century. And we're seeing the end consequences of this. I consider it very similar to the end consequences that occurred, you know, in 1989, 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet system. And I often mention the fact that though I was in the military in the 1960s, and we had a missile crisis and a lot of other things going on, that we did not have to fight a war to defeat communism. You know, at least the Marxism of that age and the economic Marxism, it's dead and gone. People aren't out there preaching that type of Marxism. The danger right now, of course, it's morphed into a different type of Marxism that we have to deal with. But the old-fashioned economic Marxism was a total failure, and that's not what they're rooting for. And that's why the ideas are what important. They have consequences, and it will, when it comes, people say, well, will this affect the Republican Party? Will the Republican Party lead the charge? No, probably not. They haven't proven themselves, but it will be the idea that the people endorse in the general public. It was well said by Keynes that, you had to change ideas, and then Nixon comes along when he thought he absolutely had control, by getting us off the gold standard. Well, we're all the Keynesians now, and he was absolutely right. But Keynesianism and inflationism and our foreign policy the signs are there that it can't last. We can't finance it. And that's why the work that people like you do, keep it going. Political pressure, whatever you can think of, is to compensate for the noise that we have to listen to. And the internet has been helpful to us, but even that, I complain about that because, the government has, a partnership with social media, and they end up undermining our personal liberties with that. But it's still been good for us because there is some information we can get out. I complain about it a lot, but I still can put out my Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we have not huge numbers, but I think important people who want to try to understand what has to happen, they can at least go to there. So, and there's so many people creative now. If somebody, I know we're very active and the staff's doing well with Campaign for Liberty, but I don't know every single group. I don't know where the energy is, and I meet some that are just started on their own. They might not even belong to anybody, but they believe as you do and as I do, and that's where the future is, and it's always been that way. So I can't thank you enough for staying involved and encourage you, because it's not so much that I give you the encouragement as when I do come across groups like yours and hear the enthusiasm and the activity you have, you give me a lot of encouragement, because I think, my arguments are coming true, and the theme of my book is obviously that the revolution is alive and well, and it's a philosophic revolution. The ideology that we're following right now is over with, and our job is to make sure people know about what liberty is all about. The founders gave us the introduction to it, and we lost our way, but it's still out there. It's still out there, and as it has its ups and downs, but each time the ideas of liberty come back, they get further refined and they're improved. Right now there's a better understanding about economic policy from an Austrian school, economic school. There's a better understanding of monetary policy. Even then, at the time of the founder, they knew a lot about this. But ideologically, we make progress. And of course, now we're in a transition period, and I'm just real confident. I've been pretty optimistic about what the activities like what you're participating in will work, and it's the only thing we can do, rather than saying that we have to go and for somehow or another root out all the people, which are the symptoms. What we want to deal with the cause, and the cause are ideological, and that's where we have an opportunity. But I want to thank you for getting me involved again and visiting with your group, and I was glad to do it. It's not quite, as nice as being there. I love that. But I want to thank you, and Dennis, thank you for working on this, and I'm going to be available here for answering some questions.
Well, that sounds great. How about a big round of applause, everybody? Well, thank you, Dr. Paul, and we, of course, appreciate everything that you do. We have great appreciation for that. We really thank you. And, you mentioned about the political pressure, and one thing I should mention is we have one of our audience members is a congressman from the 11th District, Kerry Bentivolio, who you would endorse, and he did a good job when he was in Congress, and Kerry's here, and he's very interested in hearing your message as well. So it's a very distinguished, yes sir, a very distinguished group we have here. So Dr. Paul, I'm going to start off by asking you a very open-ended question. In your judgment, what current political controversy or group of controversies would be posing the greatest threat to liberty at this point in time?
Well, I think the most important general question is what should the role of government be? I believe that was the question the founders asked and tried to answer. And I marvel at the founders for their intellectual capacity. They knew history. I mean, not 50 years or 100 years, but they knew all of history. And they had thought this through and really had a good idea about what the role of government ought to be. And though imperfect, I mean, basically it was the role of government should be minimal and it should be to protect liberty. And I think that's the most important thing, is to ask the question, what is the purpose of having this government? Is it to give us medical care and fight needless wars and all that nonsense that we do? Or if we're going to have a limited government, what should their limited role be? And that, of course, is to protect liberty. But when you narrow it down to one thing, you know, some people say, what is the issue? What should we work on, the Fed or the IRS or just what? All those are good, and whatever your motivations are, and I have particularly emphasized the Federal Reserve and monetary policy over a long period of time. But I think the one overriding issue is spending. Spending is a tax. Most people think, well, they spend, and some people have to have an income tax and different things. No, all spending is a tax, and they don't talk about that. Matter of fact, nobody really wants to cut tax and cut spending. They talk about how we're going to manipulate the tax code. But spending is a tax because the people have to pay. Unfortunately, the lower middle class pays the most, even though they don't pay income tax, because they get hit hard by a bad economy, losing jobs, and all those kinds of things. But the taxes are inflationary tax, debt. You borrow money, you pay interest. It's still a debt. And if you have to have the Fed do it, they create the money and they have the inflation. Who gets hurt the most? Not the wealthy people, even though they might be in a higher tax bracket. So the role of government should be very well defined to protect liberty and watch out for the spending, because if you could do one thing and stop the government from spending money, they couldn't have the wars, they couldn't have the welfare state, they couldn't have all this crony capitalism, they couldn't have all this welfareism going on, and that would bring everything to a halt.
Very good. Yes, and in fact, we just saw in Washington, right, just recently, they passed this ridiculous alleged budget, and they're adding $1.5 trillion to the debt on the backs of the children and the working people here in this country now. And then they said, well, we'll cut taxes a little bit, but as you point out, all spending is a tax. And boy, they seem to have a real tough time cutting spending. That doesn't seem to be something that they want to do.
No, and I predicted there will be no real tax cut. They talk about that all the time. It's just who might get a little benefit and who's going to suffer, because they do operate, the Republicans, on this, that for everything you cut, you have to balance it out. It has to be revenue neutral. There can't be a tax cut on it. So it's a lot of shenanigans, and here it is. They're still trying to introduce the bill, and I understand it's going to be postponed again. But even when you hear about it, it's going to be a lot of controversy before that bill is passed, that any of us see any benefits.
Right. Well, and you mentioned about the progressive era, and of course, the Mises Institute just issued the new book, posthumously from the late great Dr. Murray Rothbard, about the progressive era. And that just came out, and of course, Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, Robert Higgs, Tom Woods, others, including yourself, have written a lot about the negative effects that wars have on our liberty, as well as on our safety and prosperity. James Madison and others warned us about that as well, and yet so many people seem to be either unaware or uncaring about that. And I wonder what your thoughts are as to why that might be.
On the war issue, you say, or why people keep voting for the people that do the harm?
Right, and why people don't seem to care that, in the general public, you don't hear that much about it, except for smaller groups like us complaining about it.
They're very dependent, and there's too many that are receiving. They don't believe, they wouldn't accept what I said. You obviously have an open mind, and you've studied this, and you listen, well, this makes sense. But the people who are still on food stamps, they figure it's going to last forever. They have been indoctrinated by this. Deficits don't matter. It's going to last forever. The stock market is high. And the corporate welfare is probably the biggest welfare thing going on, and we have the military-industrial complex that the bit more wars we have, or threat of wars, the more money they make, and it's so well ingrained, and they don't see any end to it. And I assume it's not going to be reversed. We can keep talking about it and warning about it, but they're not going to listen to it. They're only going to pay attention when they run out of money and the ability to print money. And that I think is fast approaching. But as long as the world will keep taking paper money and the American dollar, this is going to last. They're going to be supporting the cronyism that exists in Washington, sending more people there that promise to get more stuff for the people. But the irony of all this, I think, is the fact that poor people and middle-class people do most of the voting for this system. But they come up short. If they ever knew how they're getting conned in it, as they're deceived and they get crumbs, and yet where's all the money going? And Mises predicted this. When you have a monetary system like this, the very wealthy are going to benefit. Now you have billionaires, and soon some will be trillionaires. At the same time, the lower 50%, they're not doing well. And the standard of living is going down. Real wages have not gone up since 1971, since we've been off the gold standard. And yet they have been deceived into believing, well, we have to vote for these people who promise they'll take care of us. Fortunately, though, even though that's still the case, there's a lot more people now are not believing in government. That's probably why we're having chaos in Washington, and the electoral presidential elections are causing a problem, because people are just not willing to trust what the government says. And they're at the point now. We just had more information on the Kennedy assassination, and I think by the time that dust settles a little, we'll have learned nothing more, and they'll still lie to us. And every time there's a commission, they lie to us. But more and more Americans know this, and you think, well, that's pretty sad. Yeah, it is sort of sad that they tell us our lies, but it's not sad that the American people are starting to ask questions. So that's setting the stage for us to come in and tell them the truth, that yes, there is no free lunch. If you work, though, and you have a right to keep what you earn, and you have a right to your life, you have a right to do what you want without being pestered if you don't hurt people, and you're not going to be burdened by being sent overseas to fight senseless wars and pay for these. It can have an appeal, especially if they see the handwriting on the wall, and that's why we're in flux right now, and our job is to wake up a lot of people.
Yes, and it seems as though, interestingly, in Congress right now, maybe there have been a few people that have awakened. The Stop Arming Terrorists Act, at least it has some sponsorship. The H.con.res.81, getting the U.S. to stop supporting the Saudi butchery in Yemen is going forward, and there's discussion about after what just happened in Niger about the ridiculousness of using that 2001 AUMF, and obviously Senator Paul, your son, and others are questioning what's going on with these things. Do you see any hope in that regard in the Congress or in the Senate trying to rein in this runaway warfare state?
No, I think it's great that they're waking up when the neocons start to complain like Graham was. Well, if you mean to say there's people in Nigeria and people are getting killed, and they didn't even tell me. So there's division there. But I think the neocons, unfortunately, are still very much in charge of the foreign policy. And who knows what's going on there. But the deep state is pretty powerful, because it looks like Trump will be appointing just another establishment person for the Federal Reserve. During the campaign, he had promised and paid attention to it, because he knew we had a significant. Oh, sure, I like that idea of auditing the Fed. He's not going to allow the audit of the Fed. I mean, because that's where you really get into the nitty-gritty and the foreign entanglements with monetary policy and what we did, how we bailed out so many foreign banks and foreign governments during the economic crisis. So, no, the deep state is still in charge, and yet a lot of people would think that, no, they're really fighting with each other, and they are. They're fighting over power, but they're not fighting over, really change of policy. And Trump has talked a little bit about the deep state, but But policies, I still think, are very much in charge, and it could be just pure fear, because just rethinking about the Kennedy assassination, and there's a lot of stories there that should intimidate anybody, because in a republic, a simple rule should be you should have anything close to or anything looking like the CIA or the FBI. That should be part of a free society. Doesn't mean you don't have any government at all, but you don't have secret government and people go around the world assassinating people and involved in coups. Of all the audacity for them to claim that Russia has controlled our election, when we've done 100 times like that, been involved. Even most recently, we were involved in the coup in Ukraine. Obviously, now it's discovered, and there were more countries who were involved in Africa than I ever realized. Up to 54 countries in Africa, we have some sort of interference there. So we do have an empire, and empires come to an end. And I think the chaos now is the recognition that the empire is coming to an end, and they're sort of, not knowing what to do. How are we going to finance? How are we going to hold control? So the struggle is very real, but and they're not quite ready to admit that they're not going to give up the empire gracefully. That's why, and it's controlled not by the Congress, it's controlled by the deep state.
Right, and Dr. Paul, one thing that you and Daniel McAdams have referenced on the excellent Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we had actually a discussion about this the other month from Shane Trejo, who's one of our volunteer members, is the attempt to censor information from alternative sources. Demonetization is one way they do it on YouTube and that sort of thing, or coming out and blacklisting. And I know you folks have just talked about that with how RT has been blacklisted and RPI has been blacklisted by some. And this seems to be a real problem with Google and YouTube and with some of these quasi-governmental agencies as well. What are your thoughts about that, and what can we do to fight back against that?
Well, it's an interesting philosophical question, because let's assume Google has invented their system and they participate us to get involved, and they're a private organization. And when people put nasty stuff up on there, shouldn't they have a right to monitor? And most of the people say, yeah, that is true. It's true. They do. It's private. And if it's private property, they have a right to monitor things. But it's not quite so simple. It's how these organizations came about with the assistance and complicity of the government. And they're in bed with the government when it comes to information. I mean, the government doesn't accumulate everything they know about all of us. When they want to, they can use the NSA and other people to go and find it, but they go and they get the information from the social media, and even if the social media gives up our private information, which should be illegal, they're exempt from lawsuits. So it is a corporate, government corporate, relationship there, which is so bad. No, I think just what we have to do is point it out and do our best, because you can't say, well, we have to close down or we have to have another government agency monitoring, Facebook and everything. But no, they demonetize us all the time. And sometimes we hope, well, maybe they'll change. And the publicity has been, noticed. I think Facebook and others are starting to notice, and they pay attention, but they're still very much in the driver's seat. But the real harm comes with the combination of social media and government, and what government can do with this, and that's where the real crime is. And that of course, we just have to emphasize, removing the government's role in spying on us, not so much on writing another law regulating, Facebook and the other social media. So that I don't think is the answer.
Right. And Dr. Paul, one other thing that strikes me as we're having this discussion, and you mentioned it earlier about the founders and back in that day, and the whole idea about federalism and having a federal union and the importance of the states in that federal union, and how there was supposed to be a relatively weak and very limited general government, and then things would be handled at the state and the local level. And now that thinking is beginning to have a comeback. through groups like the 10th Amendment Center and others with the state nullification movement and things of that nature. And I know you've done some, spoken out on this, done some great work there. Also, you went to Arizona when they were doing their work to get gold and silver. I think was to be accepted by the state as currency, and there are these bullion depositories like Texas was doing. What would be some of your thoughts regarding the state nullification movement?
Well, I think it's great. I think, and we hear more of it now than, say, 20 years ago or so. And, of course, Jefferson was a champion for state nullification. But I think, along with that, people ought to know about jury nullification. I've often thought that if you were looking for one little tool, that if you really could teach people and let them realize that the original intent was that the final evaluator of a law was the jury. You know, if they decide the law was unfair, the juries had the power to say, we're not going to find somebody guilty because it's just a lousy law. You know, if that were the case, you know, they could rule as they see fit on tax laws and drug laws and everything else. So the juries should have, but a lot of people don't realize that because they're easily intimidated because they get instruction from the judges and people get into trouble. The jury nullification group could, you know, all they'd have to do is pass out a flyer someplace and say, you know, jurors have the right to nullify these laws. So, but in the educational system, this was one reason why I got involved in homeschooling, because these are the kind of things we can teach. And we can't wave a wand and everybody knows about it, but more and more people do know it now. And the fact that we're passing and getting attention at the state level on the monetary issue, because the Constitution is very clear. The states can use only gold and silver as legal tender. Well, if the states can't use anything else, how can anybody else do anything? Because everybody lives in a state, supposedly. But we've drifted a long way, certainly since the 1860s, from this whole notion that the states have a bit of sovereignty. Right now, there's very, very little of state sovereignty, and but I do like the issue going on about secession. You know, because it's even led by liberals. When California threatens to secede, you know, it sort of makes our point. So I was kidding, but maybe this is half serious. Is that, you know, if you have a group of states coming together voluntarily, and you should have the right to leave, maybe the people who are in there, if you could get everybody to vote somebody out, kick somebody out of the system. But the problem really comes because we live in a welfare state. That's really the problem, is the welfareism and what governments tell the states they have to do. But that'll come to an end when the monetary system doesn't work. We just print money and it makes everything worse rather than it tiding people over.
Well, you're certainly right about that. And yes, the secession discussion, that's the spirit of 1776, right? The Declaration of Independence. It doesn't get any more American than that. Also with the
secession of those countries that left the Soviet Union, you know, that was a pretty good secession too.
Sure, that was great, and we see some of this idea bubbling up again along with the nullification. And on the jury nullification, by the way, you made a reference about the pamphlets. And we have a case here in Michigan, up in the more rural northern area of the state, where there was an ex-minister was passing out jury nullification pamphlets. There was no trial going on, but he was outside the courthouse, I believe. He's been arrested, and I think he's been convicted of jury tampering. And Dr. Paul, there was no jury with which to tamper. So this is really, and this is a cause a number of people have talked about. As you know, there are, as you say, there are so many things for us to be concerned with and to fight back against and to be worried about. But this poor fellow, this is really rotten, and of course, this strikes right at the very heart of the American system. And you mentioned about the homeschooling, and perhaps you'd like to tell the folks gathered here, because that's an area of great interest, about the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum that I know you and Tom Woods and others have worked on so diligently.
Yeah, Dan, I'm very enthused about it because I do believe long term that's one of the most important things I can do. You know, I can do these things shorter term, you know, whether it's running for Congress or giving a speech and running for office and doing the program. But long term, if we continue to build a homeschooling group, it's secular in the sense that it deals with a free society. There are some very, very good homeschooling groups that are related to religious beliefs and things, and that should be fine. But my system would be to just legalize freedom and allow people to have it, but to understand the basics of freedom. And when you think of the people, Gary North and Tom have been fantastic in the amount of videos that they have done. They're unbelievable. And it's a program which is a little bit different because it's really self-directed. The individual can direct themselves at their own speed, and they have access to correspondence and getting along, but it's a little bit different. But the one goal, even though they go over all systems, they will talk about fascism and everything else, but they really, in the program we emphasize, in fact, what a free society is all about and why natural rights are important. And so far, I think it's very encouraging, but that's a real long-term project. But we never thought in starting this, you know what, boy, maybe someday we'll have half of the people coming to this school. Now, we still work on the assumption that we're looking for that 8, 10, 12% of people who are important in changing ideas. It's the ideas that change the world, and I certainly think we need the changes, and we're betting on the fact that it's an idea that has time returned again, emphasis on liberty. So that's why I'm delighted about what you guys are doing, and I only want to encourage you and keep up the good work, because we need it. And just as we talked a little bit here, as we talk about one issue, there's always another issue. And I think even specializing in the particular issue, the local issues, whether it's the state's issue on monetary affairs and red light cameras and all these things. So there's always something that gets the attention to make the point about the principle of liberty and the principle of non-aggression. I think that is so important. And what is the principle? Why do we have government in a free society? And I mentioned it many times in the campaign, I think one of the best messages comes from Bastiat's the law. If you and I can't do it, why in the world do we tolerate the government? They lie to us, they cheat, they steal, and they kill. And we do it, and rightfully so. We can get punished for doing those kind of things. But why do we allow the government to do it? And that's unfortunate. So we have to apply that rule of non-aggression to the government, and we should set that as one of our major goals.
Well, amen to that. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Maybe we can have we have one question. Jim Tokarski would like to ask you a question, Dr. Paul, and Jim is quickly coming up here.
Then we'll move on.
Yes, he's a quick fellow.
Hi, Dr. Paul. My question would be, you touched upon it just a little bit ago about this, what happened during the campaign with this idea of collusion. Apparently the Democrats are the ones that started the whole thing. And now it's turned back on them. If we are to believe the information that we're receiving right now, it was really the Hillary campaign in this dossier that was being developed to turn the tide on Trump. It didn't happen, so I just wondered what your further thoughts are on what exactly is going on with this concept of collusion with the Russians.
Yeah, well, when it comes with, obviously the evidence is there that the big collusion was with Hillary and the Russians and the money and her foundation. I mean, that is so bad. But I think the suggestion that somebody made yesterday or today, we ought to have another special prosecutor, not that they're the answer to things, but a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary and her collusion and put Napolitano in charge of it. I think we can get to the bottom of it. That would be great. That'd be a lot of fun.
Right, and you meant Judge Napolitano, not Janet Napolitano. Right. Dr. Paul, you've been very generous with your time, and everybody here really appreciates all the work that you have done. We are true believers in the cause of liberty. And you say that we've encouraged you, you've certainly encouraged us, and for those of us that had the pleasure of meeting you at some of the get-togethers, either in Texas or up here in Michigan, it's always been wonderful. We hope someday that you can come back up here to the great state of Michigan, and we'd love to see you up here, but you keep up the great work, sir, and I know that you're anxious to go see the World Series and watch the Astros wrap this thing up. So, and by the way, let me just mention, by the way, when Dr. Paul was in Congress, He was the #1 baseball player, I think, not just for the Republican. Remember they used to have those congressional baseball games? He was. Now you won't be surprised. He was the best hitter of any of them. He led the Republicans. He was better than all the Democrats. And so not only is he a fan of sports, but he actually participated and did those things. So how about a big round of applause for Dr. Ron Paul?
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Dr. Paul. Thank you very much, sir. Have a great evening. Good night.